This is The First Century, a podcast devoted to stories from that influential period of history, including Rome, Judea, Christianity, and more. I'm your host, Dr. Brian Schmisek. Get ready to go back in time and enter a world before computers, the stagecoach, the printing press, or even stirrups had been invented for horses. We're about to enter the first century. Episode 28. Caligula's dinner parties and his love for the theater. Back in Rome, Gaius had few trusted advisors, since he had killed his father-in-law Silanus, Macro's wife Annia, and so many others. Plus, Herod Agrippa was gone, having sailed for Alexandria and then Judea. So those on the lower social scale stepped up to fill the void, one of whom was Apelles, an actor from Ascalon on the Mediterranean coast in Judea. Based on Apelles' personal experience, he had cultivated an intense dislike of Jews, and he encouraged in Gaius an anti-Jewish policy. Another who stepped up was Helicon of Egypt, Gaius' court jester. He also held anti-Jewish sentiments, including mockery of Jews in his jokes and acts before Gaius. Gaius loved dinner parties, and he hosted many. His own uncle, Claudius, could be the butt of jokes at these events. If Claudius ever arrived late, there would no longer be a place reserved for him. Instead, he had to search out a place for himself, which was a humiliating slight. Though such behavior might be excused as unintentional, other actions were not. For example, when Claudius would nod off after dinner, a frequent occurrence of his, other attendees would pelt him with pits from olives and dates. Even as he snored, pranksters would put slippers on his hands and then strike him to startle him awake. And as he rubbed his eyes with his slipper-covered hands, the guests would roar with laughter. Now, during this summer, without those to monitor and advise the princeps, he began to act in more flagrant ways. During dinners with senators and their wives, Gaius would take the hand of one wife or another and lead her to the bedroom. Upon their return to the dinner table, Gaius would comment on the paramours' talents or lack thereof, often leaving the offended senator, not to mention the woman herself, speechless. For example, the prominent senator and former consul Asiaticus Valerius and his wife were once at dinner with Gaius, and the princeps took Asiaticus's wife in the way described above. Upon returning to the table, Gaius critiqued the performance of Asiaticus's wife and taunted Asiaticus himself. Asiaticus, a proud man, was the first man from Gaul to become a senator, and the first from Gaul to serve as consul. He chose to simply bide his time, though the embarrassment was real, and the episode had the potential to create a tremendous rift in the marital relationship. At another dinner party, Gaius heard about the lovely Lollia Paulina, whose grandmother was one of the most beautiful women in Rome in her time. Lollia Paulina was now in Greece, married to Publius Memmius Regulus, who had served as Suffolk consul in 31 and was now governor of Moesia, Macedonia, and Achaia since 35. If Paulina's grandmother was one of the most beautiful women in Rome, Gaius believed that Paulina must be exceptionally beautiful as well. So Gaius determined to marry her. He recalled from duty Regulus and Paulina, and had Regulus give Paulina to him in marriage before allowing him to return to his post wifeless. Lollia Paulina joined Gaius at various dinner parties after that, one of which, a betrothal banquet, included Pliny the Elder. At this banquet, Lollia was covered with emeralds and pearls interlaced alternately and shining all over her head, hair, ears, neck, and fingers. Pliny later wrote that the sum total amounted to the value of 40 million sesterces. At the same dinner, she spoke about how her jewels were not presents from any previous emperor, but possessions handed on to her from her family, most especially her grandfather, who had acquired them from the eastern provinces when he served there. However, she did not mention at this same dinner party that her grandfather had taken so many gifts from rulers and kings of the East during his time that he lost powerful friends, including the son of Augustus, Gaius Caesar, and eventually he committed suicide. When Pliny saw her dressed as she was, he couldn't help but think that these jewels had come at the cost of her own grandfather's life. On the way home from the dinner, Pliny said to a friend, This is the final harvest of plunder. Her grandfather disgraced himself by taking gifts from Eastern kings, was struck from the friendship of Gaius, Augustus's own son, and finally took poison, all so that his granddaughter could one day lie there in the lamplight, glittering with 40 million sesterces worth of jewels. Pliny continued, Now imagine setting the achievements of some of our victorious generals on one side of the ledger, the trophies they carried in triumph, the spoils they displayed, and on the other side of the ledger, a single woman, Lollia Paulina, reclining beside the emperor, adorned like the prize of a conquest. Would anyone not conclude that it would have been better for those ancient heroes to be dragged from their victory chariots than to have won their battles, only for this to be the outcome? Pliny's attitude reflected the generally conservative views of the Roman aristocracy. And in any case, Gaius divorced Lollia after about 6 months in early 38, claiming infertility, and he forbade her from associating with any man afterward. Gaius then took Milonia Caesonia as his wife, who, according to Suetonius, was neither young nor beautiful. She had 3 children by an earlier husband and was pregnant with her 4th. She gave birth to that 4th child on her wedding day with Gaius, and on that very day he proclaimed that the child was his. He named the baby Julia Drusilla, after his deceased sister, and later joked that he knew the child was his because she had such an awful temperament and awful disposition, scratching the faces of those who would come close with attempts to kiss and caress. Gaius's relationship with Caesonia raised eyebrows. He would joke with her that if she didn't behave, he would have her tortured and killed. He would even parade her before the troops, and with dinner guests, he would display her naked. At another dinner party, Gaius was laughing to himself, and one of his guests wanted in on the joke. Gaius replied, I was really just thinking that if I only said the word, you'd all be dead. Though Gaius had dismissed all the charges of maestas, or treason, when he became princeps, he was now more inclined to execute people, as this meant he could take the estate and add it to the imperial coffers. Gaius would say to the executioner, Make him feel that he's dying. The princeps relished torture, and even more, he relished knowing that an enemy would be tortured. One bright quipster, Passienus, remembered how Gaius had bided his time on Capri with Tiberius, only to turn into a despot as princeps, and so Passienus said of Gaius, quote, There is no better slave and no worse master. About this time, Gaius received the letter from Herod Agrippa outlining the situation in Alexandria. The princeps thought it was a good time to act. He charged Flaccus, the Roman governor of Egypt, with maestas, treason, and named Pollio as the new governor. He also ordered the centurion Bassus to go to Alexandria and to make the change. In addition to dinner parties, Gaius also enjoyed the theater, and he particularly enjoyed a certain actor by the name of Mnester, who was very famous in his day. Gaius had such unbridled affection for Mnester that he would kiss him even in the middle of the games in front of the crowds, and when Mnester performed, if any in the audience made the slightest noise, Gaius would have that person dragged from his seat and beaten. Fashionable Romans attended the theater. One of the most admired actors of the time was Quintilia, also known for her beauty. In antiquity, actors were of the lowest class and often disregarded in elite society. But Quintilia attracted significant attention, especially from an influential Roman senator by the name of Pompedius. Unfortunately for Quintilia, Pompedius had an enemy who would stop at nothing to impugn him, and that enemy's name was Timidius. To strike at Pompedius, Timidius falsely accused him of making indecent reproaches against him. As evidence, he called Quintilia as a witness. Timidius knew that Quintilia and Pompedius were carrying on an affair, and that Quintilia would deny these false accusations. But that wasn't the point. Timidius knew that as Quintilia denied the accusations, she would be tortured into a confession. And, if she didn't confess, her being tortured would strike the heart of Pompedius. As expected, once charged, Quintilia denied the accusations as false. She was then brought to the rack. Cassius Chaerea, the high-spirited young soldier who supported Germanicus in putting down the mutiny after Augustus's death in 14, was now tribune of the Praetorian Guard. Gaius assigned him the duty of torturing her. Gaius often tasked Chaerea with meting out torture, partly because he used to tease him for being effeminate and for speaking in a high-pitched voice. Gaius mocked him relentlessly, calling him names, and when Chaerea would ask for the daily watchword, Gaius would reply with sexually suggestive terms, so that when Chaerea passed on the watchword to his soldiers, they would laugh at such words coming from such an effeminate voice. If Chaerea ever thanked Gaius, the emperor would extend his hand to be kissed, and then move it in obscene ways. Gaius believed that Chaerea would torture prisoners more ruthlessly to deny any hint of being effeminate. Gaius was onto something, and this time was no exception. Chaerea tortured Quintilia on the rack to the point of disfigurement and dislocated limbs, but she never gave in. Even prior to the torture, she said to the guards to be of good courage and not fear the consequences, for she would bear this burden with magnanimity. Her character was such that even under torture, she would not confess to a false accusation. When Chaerea presented the disfigured Quintilia to Gaius, the princeps had a momentary feeling of pity. He acquitted Quintilia and Pompedius, and then compensated Quintilia with 800,000 sesterces for her miserable state and her glorious patience under duress and torment. Next time, we'll hear how Caligula's birthday was celebrated in Alexandria and how Flaccus was deposed from the governorship of that province.